Hello and welcome to another episode of the Leadership and Construction Podcast. I'm your host, Michael, and today I'm joined by civil engineer, a reservist officer in the British Army, and a true gentleman, Nathanael Pickett. And today we're going to talk about the difference between the leadership within the military and leadership within the construction sector. So, Nathaniel, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me on the podcast, Michael. I do listen to it. I really do enjoy it, and you're spreading the good news. And it's really interesting listening to your journey and the sources and where you're getting all your sort of leadership understanding from.
Well, fantastic. Thank you ever so much. It's a big honour, and it's a great privilege to have you on the show. And just to give some of the viewers and the listeners a bit of background, the reason why we've come to know each other and we've connected is based upon an article that you wrote for the ICE, the Institution of Civil Engineers, around your experience of leadership in the military and what that means in terms of for the construction industry. And I think from an outsider perspective, looking into the military, it looks very command and control, shouting and telling people what to do. And I've come to learn that that's maybe not quite the case. So we're going to explore those sort of topics today. But I'm really just going to throw the platform to you and just give us a bit of background behind yourself and what's your journey been? How did you get to where you are today?
How did I get to where I am today? Well, I think it's probably best I start off with the construction side of things, because that's what I've been doing for the longest, really. Goes back to school, doing my A-levels, did maths, physics, and some other A-levels. I did well enough that I got into the University of Portsmouth, where I studied civil engineering and got a BEng in civil engineering there. And then I got my first job with Trant Engineering, building a waste recycling centre on the Isle of Wight. And then I moved across to Galliford Try. Now, my journey with the Army really started, and the Army Reserve started at university with the Southampton Officer Training Corps in 2014. I joined those sort of halfway through my degree and really enjoyed it. I was always into scouting, and I think probably actually that was the source of my learning how to work with people who aren't my friends, work with people from different backgrounds and different cultures. And that interest of being outdoors and that adventure definitely was founded in the scouting I did as a young person. And then when I was at university, I got involved in Southampton University Officer Training Corps. And that really just took that adventure, that being outside, getting the fresh air, challenging myself. Never challenged myself as much as I had previously in my life when I was, waking up. I think I talk a little bit about it in my article I wrote. But even when I was a student, before I went to Sandhurst and the commissioning course there, waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday, thinking all my other course mates are probably fast asleep. And I'm patrolling through some woods to go do a dawn attack. But it was brilliant. It was really good. It really helped develop me, and I found it something I really enjoyed, and it became part of my life. So when I left, graduated university, I joined 457 Battery 106 Regiment down in Southampton, which was my local regiment because I was living along the south coast. And I went and did my gunner training, which was really good fun, learning things from a soldier perspective, where previously with the officer training corps, I was learning from the officer perspective. And that was brilliant. I went and did my basic soldier training, went and got gassed, and I learned there's sort of two types of fun in life, or there's sort of three types of fun. You have fun at the time, you have type 1 fun, you had fun at the time, you look back, that was fun. You have type 2 sort of fun. You have fun at the time, and you look back at it and you go, sorry, you didn't have fun at the time, sorry, and you look back at it and you go, nah, yeah, that was actually kind of fun. And there's a lot of that actually in my phase 2 sort of soldier training. And then there's type 3 sort of fun, which wasn't fun at the time, and you look back and say, nah, it wasn't fun at all, ever. and there were elements of that, in particular, I think going on stag, which is where you're a sentry, you're protecting everyone in your platoon. You're watching out for any enemy encroaching on your harbour area, which is an area where you conduct admin and you sleep and get rest. And doing that when it's raining and really early in the morning, or midnight, and you just think, I'd rather be asleep. Not great fun. So that's not fun at the time, and it's not fun looking back. However, things like doing the obstacle assault course and the sense of achievement you get from completing the course and the people you get to be with, that's fun all the way through, even though maybe sometimes it's not quite fun at the time. Then on top of that, sort of to finish off my journey, where the article that we connected over came from, I went and did Army Officer Selection Board, which is a interview which lasts for a week in total days. It's about 5 days long. It's really intense. It's probably the longest job interview I've ever done, and I'll probably ever do, unless I maybe go and become an astronaut. So it's and they look at you 360. They look at your mental aptitude. They do some mental aptitude profiling tests, which is like looking at English and maths. But they also put you in command tasks, which are like sort of the floor is lava and you've got to get across without touching certain objects, and you've got to carry the burden, which might be some ammunition or a casualty across an area with you. And there's other things like group discussions, and it's just a really, really intense, a lot of self-induced pressure. But at the end of AOSB, you get feedback, which was actually the first time I think I've ever had 360 feedback on who I am and my potential to be a leader, and actually look at my personality. And there's two phases of it. And after the first phase, there's a big lesson learned from that my emotional intelligence was particularly weak, because I sort of shot someone down and I needed to be a bit more aware of team, the emotions of my team. And that's something actually I took to heart, and I went away and developed that. And that's a big thing about leadership, is that feedback process. But anyway, that was just selection. Going on to going out the back of that, I was successful, which is a really great feeling on the main board, AOSB main board, naturally, as I'm an officer now. And then I booked on to do my commissioning course, which was at the Royal Military Academy of Sandhurst, the home of leadership for the British Army. And it is a world-renowned institution of leadership. It's something that the government sells across the world, leadership teaching. Civilian companies come in to run leadership courses and learn from the instructors and staff at Sandhurst. They've been there for circa 200 years, and continue, it is processes to develop leadership across all levels, from junior officer level, which is maybe more of a man management leadership style, and dealing with persons and getting influencing teams to do tasks, to higher level strategic thinking, which is sort of like the next phase of leadership, where you're not dealing so much with people, but you're on that step of being a visionary, and you're looking forward so that you can direct your team towards the goal. And that's sort of something that's quite considered in business, and that's the sort of people the board sits on, and that's what the MD and all those sort of people get up to. And within the army, the very senior officers, that is what they get up to. They envision the future and they enact policies to make sure that happens. And so I went to Sandhurst, which was an experience. It really was. And I'll send you the link for the article, so hopefully you can put it in the description of this podcast.
We will.
For people to access. But I think one of the biggest takeaways that I got from being at Sandhurst was the development of character. All this leadership theory and application stuff, there was that there, and it was really good. I really enjoyed it. But actually, it was putting myself under pressure, being put under pressure, either self-induced pressure through scenarios and getting in a tailspin about what's going on. I've got to get my locker sorted, otherwise I'm going to fail my room inspection, and then I'm going to be on dress parade, yada yada yada. But actually, also the pressure of commanding or being part of the command team. So maybe not the platoon commander, but maybe a section commander, and actually commanding my team, my section, to achieve objectives in a high pressure environment. which is ultimately warfare, which is the profession of arms, which is we're trying to go and close and kill the enemy. Though we're using blank ammunition, you're still running around and you're still taking cover and you're having to move. And that physical exhaustion has a huge impact on on someone's ability to perform cognitively and make right decisions and make good leadership decisions in that command and control element. But that's only one part of the story when it comes to army leadership. I won't steal my sandwiches too much later. But one of the biggest things was me finding out about myself and my weaknesses and how I respond in certain situations when I am tired. There was a fascinating lecture we did. We have through the Centre for Army Leadership, and they had a lecturer come in and he says the first thing they do when interrogating people, which British Army doesn't do because we adhere to the Geneva Convention, etc. But if you are taken by irregular forces or terrorist organisations, one thing they will do is actually deprive you of sleep, because when you are tired, you have a lot less emotional control, and self-control is a lot harder. It's a known fact.
I can probably palm my kids off on the British Army. They can give them no sleep for a while.
Well, I mean, I'd definitely say it'd be the USSR. Back in the day, that they became masters of interrogation, and it was all psychological. None of it was physical, but it's all psychological and sleep deprivation, just making you really tired and just pushing your buttons to get you to slowly break. And that was a really interesting sort of takeaway. I always know I get grumpy, but it's interesting. There's some science behind it. That making the right decisions when you're tired is hard, and doing the right thing when no one's looking, and when it's a bad day for you, that's a true test of character. And Sandhurst is full of those. Some people say it's a game, and if you get caught, you pay the fine. You get in a lot of trouble, be it doing laps with the PTI or getting on administrative instruction, AGI 47. But yeah, that's it's interesting looking at that side of things.
Absolutely. And so when did you then sort of move into the sort of construction sector? Was that after all this training at Sandhurst?
So that was during then. So as a reservist, I worked my full-time job.
Wow.
So since 2016, so when I graduated 2016, class 2016 from Portsmouth, I got my job the November with Tran. And I've been working all the way through as a reservist. I do 2 years annual camp, which is sort of training. And actually, I got back from camp in October, just start of October, and that was challenging because I was first time in troop leadership. So as a troop commander, commanding my soldiers out on exercise, and we're Royal Artillery, and we're doing an infantry exercise. And though the British Army ethos is soldier first, we don't do it as regularly because we have other weapon systems we need to train and practice on. So it was a big challenge to keep an eye on the morale of my troops and also making sure they're fit to fight. And it was a big challenge for me as well, because I'd never actually done it for real. I've always done it in a training environment, and it was like, there's no safety blanket anymore. If I get this wrong, I've got trained soldiers under me. It's not fellow officer cadets. It's not my peers. These are my soldiers. So any mistakes I make could be, they fall on me. There's no, he's just training. It's Sir's buggered up now. He got it wrong, and I could lose. And losing that credibility is really dangerous, because if you lose credibility and you lose the faith of your soldiers, it can be really difficult to bring that back.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you're doing all this at the same time as working a full-time. This is all part-time, which is one of my close friends and valued colleague. He works for the British Army as a reservist as well. And I don't know how he gets the energy to do those 2 weeks away every year, and then the weekends as well, and obviously then work a full-time job. I definitely don't think that's something I could do. But that's a huge amount of busyness, going from full-time work to then, going into the reserves as well. So in terms of
there's a great pleasure, I think, in the reserves. So like I say, there's a great pleasure in the reserves, and I don't think you'll find it in most other sort of industries, wherever you work, is that everyone is motivated to be there, which is really interesting when you're with motivated soldiers and officers who are motivated because they want to be there, because they're giving up their free time. It's like volunteering, but you are getting paid to be there, so there are slightly different boundaries. But yeah, people want to be there, and it is a pleasure to actually command and be part of those teams, and be commanded by people who want to be there, because you know, they're not going to take the mick. And when you're at work, not everyone wants to be at work. I know certain days I don't want to be at work. When it was raining, you know, when the storms came in the other day, I didn't really want to be outside trying to survey some points in. But that's the way it goes.
So that's what I was going to ask then. So whilst you're working in the construction sector full time, what's your role in that construction? Are you working for a contractor? Are you working for a consultant? What's your role?
So I'm on the contractor side of things. I've always been. I'm a site engineer, currently working for Galliford Try, and we're working on the AMP7 framework for Southern Water, which is wastewater, clean water processing. So I'm working on all those projects. So Galliford Try got a big lump. I think it's £250 million. I had to check on constructor.net, news.net, but over 5 years. To upgrade Southern Water systems. Not with that, unfortunately, civils, it's not all concrete. You know, the mechanical guys got to get their good chunk of it.
You don't get to see all the good stuff that goes under the ground. It's all the above ground. It's all the attention.
So exactly. It's all the commissioning and costs.
As a site engineer, just for those that maybe not quite aware, what would in a very nutshell, what would your typical day? You know, you're talking about being outside in the pouring rain. What would your typical day consist of?
Typical day: go in, do the safety brief, or be part of the safety brief in the mornings. Talks if required, and then my main purpose is to set out the locations to build things, to construct structures in the environment, in the world. 3D coordinates. I say it needs to be here at this height, and this northing and easting. So we say it's going to be there, this deep. This is how we're going to build it. Sometimes it sounds straightforward, but there's a lot more to it. We look at the drawings that the consultants draw for us, the designers send through to us, and we have to take information from those drawings, because the designers don't put everything we need in there, because sometimes we're going to need information that you could just never guess, the information we need to extrapolate from there. And then we go through the construction process. On top of that, we're monitoring the quality. I monitor the quality, so taking cubes, sampling cubes, recording where things are built as well. So it might say, oh yeah, you put everything where the designer says. The reality is it doesn't always work like that, especially in water, where we're building on existing sites where there's services, other structures in the way. We've got to be adaptable. You know, we dig down, we find uncharted services, which is, you know, a cable that hasn't been picked up on a utility survey, and it's not on any records. And then we go, oh, there's this big, you know, 400 mil diameter cast iron pipe going straight through where we're going to build this tank. Does anyone know what it does? No, but we can feel like it's vibrating when we put our hands in it. There must be something pumping through that. What are we going to do about it? And think of those problems, really. So in a nutshell, setting out in the 3D environment, in the real world, where things need to be. And then also quality control.
So your role, the way I see it, is very much the gateway between because I'm a designer, so I'm a consultant, so I do all the design bits and try and give the contractor as much information as they need to build it. Never enough. You're always wanting more. But you know, your bit is that critical bit, which is taking what we have designed in 3D and getting that into the real world before, you know, the concrete lorries come on, and et cetera. So that's hugely, tremendously important role. At least a lot of it's outside. A lot of it can be sort of very long hours, as you say. The bit that I like, so I used to, before the pandemic, spend about half my time on site, half my time in the office. And I'd like that bit outside in the office, because I always pick the summer, obviously, because I don't like the cold weather. But, you know, when you do find something that you didn't expect, that's when I think your real engineering starts. You found an issue, you've really got to use what you've got around you to be able to solve it. And so that's the bit of the construction that I really get excited about.
And I think there's a lot of the real engineering starts when we take it's transforming your drawing and looking at the ground and how we're going to do it, because it's the levels you put on there. There's all different specifications, etc. You need to, and the ground dictates a lot about what you're going to do, what the stalls are going to do, how you're going to excavate it. Is probably the biggest challenge, especially when you're putting big tanks in the ground.
Absolutely.
But it's good. It's good that you're one of those good designers who comes out on sites and doesn't just sit there in the office, nice and comfortable. Because then we can talk to you direct instead of playing email chase.
Put a target on my back and etc. Yeah. No, I do exactly. I do like that bit, and I had a great, just before the pandemic started, I had a great period where I was designer and then got to see on site and was there helping them through construction, and again we found things that we didn't expect. We had to work. Yes. We had to work with what we got, and we came up with some solutions. And sometimes those solutions are just stepping outside the sort of normal standards. Yeah. So you have to use real engineering principles and real engineering to come up with a solution, which is it's a bit that I really get excited about. So that's fantastic. So let's start talking then about the sort of comparisons that you can see between your life in the military and your life on the construction. What I can see from an observer is the military, I believe, is probably quite hierarchical. So you'll have your sort of commanding officer and then everyone sort of below that, and the information sort of flows downwards. I see that a lot in the construction sector myself, but I see a lot of problems with that in the construction sector as well. So what's your sort of view and what's your experience?
I think it'd be really good to look at this in sort of the similarities. Look at some of the similarities in between, and I'm going to talk from a contracting point of view.
Sure.
I've never really worked in a consultancy. Though I do look for that in the future to achieve my attributes and all that good stuff, and then talk about differences. I think that's probably the best way.
Sounds good.
So when we look at the similarities, the minute look at the army, there's slightly different differences, and I think the army where it is more hierarchical in terms of discipline and chain of command compared to that of the other services of the RAF and of the Navy, because of the nature of what they do in terms of sending people to go and close and kill the enemy is the ultimate function of what soldiers do. Though there are lots of other roles within the army, and actually you'll be surprised that the amount of people involved just to put people on the front line. It shocked me as well. It's quite a high number. So there are hierarchical structures, as you mentioned before, and on site there's very much so. You start with the project manager, and then you come down to the site manager. Then he's going to have his right-hand man, which is almost like his NCO. So he's going to have his NCO, which is going to be your foreman, senior foreman maybe, and you might have a couple of foremen with him. And then the site manager, you're going to have your sub-agent, which you're looking at your engineers, and you've got your engineers underneath that. So the army is very similar, where you're going to have your colonel, who's going to maybe be the commander of the regiment, and then maybe he might have a few site managers underneath him, which are going to be all his company commanders or battery commanders, depending what regiment or corps you're in. But yeah, you're going to have all his unit commanders, so sub-unit commanders underneath him. And then the sub-unit commander is going to have some people underneath him to organise all his troops. But alongside the officers, you have the NCOs who have a lot of military. They came up through the soldier route, and they've got a lot of military experience. And at each of those leadership points, the officer actually has an NCO alongside them to manage the troops and look at the logistical side of things.
When you say, sorry, just NCO, what's that?
A non-commissioned officer.
Okay.
So that is a soldier who has been in the army and worked up through the ranks to a non-commissioned officer status, where they normally got quite a lot of experience. Normally done regular army, they've done a few tours. In the reserve, sometimes you do find some of them come tours, or they've come across from regular to reserve. And these are they haven't gone to Sandhurst. They haven't gone down the commissioning selection pipeline, and they do a different job to that of the officers. Officers are more into planning. They look at the planning, they look at the strategical aspect of what needs to be achieved in the mission. And the NCOs, they look more at the administrative side of things, the G4, which is the logistical aspect of what needs to be done. Do we need ammunition? Do we need water? Casualties? How are we going to deal with them? And they tend to have a lot more experience. They've been in the army for a bit longer as well, compared to the officers. So you're looking, a sergeant has probably been in for 9 years minimum, as where, and then a sergeant will be paired with a second lieutenant, who's only been to Sandhurst as a reservist. That's a 2-month course. As a regular, that's a year course, pretty much a 42-week course. So going back to so the hierarchy, there is a hierarchical structure, and there are report lines. You report to people directly. You have your managers. I think looking at another similarity in between the army leadership, military leadership, and construction is they're about people. It's all about people. In the army, we're on about using, we use people to achieve our mission, to achieve our aims. And in the construction industry, I've come up with this thing called the construction triangle. We talked about it before, where there's 3 elements. You have materials, tools, and people. And it's like a combustion triangle. If you don't have one of those 3 elements, construction is not going to happen. You're not going to build stuff.
It's true.
And there's a lot of processes behind management for material and tools. But people, you need to lead people, not just manage them.
That's quite. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah, I was saying, and that's where your journey, I think, kicked in, because you can manage the materials process, you can manage the tool process, but the people process, you need to be able to lead that. Now, the army have identified that massively, and it always talks about the biggest asset of the army is the people. It's not the platforms that we use, that they will give us an advantage, tactical advantage in some ways. But if we have bad people on good platforms, they're not going to perform well. We need to make sure our people are going to get the job done. They're going to be inspired to get the job done, and the styles of leadership of that are going to change. And we'll probably touch on that a little bit later about the sort of styles, etc.
Yeah.
But sorry, you're talking about that people, that construction triangle.
Yeah, I just really like that triangle idea, because it's absolutely right. Materials, and people. What was the other one? Sorry, tools. So materials and tools, materials and equipment. Yes, absolutely. You need management in order to manage those processes. But people, and what happens as part of my journey is you find that you apply management to people as well, because that's what you know. You know how to manage quality and materials and tools. But you can't apply those same rules to managing people or leading people. It becomes a completely different set of skill sets. So I like that. That's brilliant.
I'd like to chuck a quote in there, actually, when we're talking about management. So John Maxwell, I just finished his book. I think it's 360-degree leadership. Oh no, it's the 21 irrefutable laws of leadership. A very good book. I recommend. But he has a quote about it. It says, "Leadership is about influencing people to follow, whilst management focuses on maintaining systems and processes." And that massively, I think, hits on the head what that's all about. That you can do your systems and processes with people, put them in the right box and etc., but they'll just churn out the same old stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they won't dig in. They won't dig in that extra mile.
Absolutely.
To achieve. So, that's I think that's where the similarities sort of end. And you have that sort of similar structure with the non-commissioned officer, which are the people who've been experienced working on site for a long time. Normally been site labourers, worked up to become a ganger, then maybe became a junior foreman, senior foreman, senior foreman, and those are normally sitting at the right hand of the site manager, who maybe came in for a different route. It sort of came in through more of an educational route. Maybe was an engineer, maybe was a QS or whatever. And then they're sitting there doing the programming, looking at the things, and the site manager is looking at logistics, ordering stuff. And that relationship, I think, is very similar at the lower level.
I want to... Sorry, I was just going to add to that, if you don't mind me just interjecting.
Yeah, please.
That's when we talk about designers going to site, most designers do come through that route, I mean, I went through college part-time and university part-time, but maybe more of the education sort of route. And this is why engineers and designers need to get out on site, because it's at that point you really get to understand how things are built, because the people that are building it have been doing it far longer than you've had your education for. So I think that's quite important point to make as well from a consultancy's perspective.
Yeah, and I think also the consultancy wise, you've got your technicians and then you have your engineers, and you'll get senior technicians who will sit at the right hand of maybe the lead designer because they both have skills, and I think it's, looking forwards about the information we put into models going forwards. It's all about extracting that information, and engineers are going to have to be ever more reliant on technicians and subject matter experts, SMEs,
absolutely,
about interrogating the model to get the information out. As they become more and more complex.
Absolutely,
So there's similarity there. I think the NCO officer at junior level, and then looking up the tree, you have your senior officers, your brigadiers, your generals, lieutenant generals, and full colonels as well. Those are the visionaries of the army. Those are the people who look at policy. They look at where the army is going, where they're heading, and they decide on how things are going to be done. And that's like the board within an organization. The people who sit on the board, they are there and they are looking where the business is going, where the business unit is heading, depending on the size of your organization. And that is their job, is to not look at what you're doing down at the bottom, because sometimes they do, and that's poor leadership. But what they should be doing is looking ahead and looking at that job. So I think that sort of summarizes. Have you got any other sort of comments about that, sort of similarities that you may have sort of picked up?
No, I think just to add to that bit that you're saying about the directors and the board of directors at the top of organizations have this vision. I think this is where you might come on to is you sort of generals, if you like, and the visionaries of the military and in the army. Their message and their communication and the vision is sort of very clear, and it is very inspiring in a lot of cases. Whereas for organizations, and a lot of the time, it's about making profit and things like that, very arbitrary sort of targets. And I think that's something that's about changing, and we're on the cusp of changing. We need to change. That it's not very inspiring to work for someone just to make them more money. That's not a really inspiring way to do it. So I think there's a slight difference there.
And I think that's going to actually touch on a little bit what I like to talk about, the differences.
I'll let you go ahead.
No, that'll come towards the end, I think, as a sort of going through this. So I think differences, I think the big one that you realize is the investment in leadership. Investment in management training, leadership and management training. The army, there's a very high investment, but what the army does is very high risk. To put this in perspective, unfortunately, a soldier lost their life recently out on Salisbury Plain because they were training. But that is what we do. That is what the army does. That is the purpose of what we do. So we do work, even in a training environment, it's very high risk. So the army identify that, and they spend a lot of money in running institutions like Sandhurst to train their officers. But there's also further development for senior staff college and senior staff college for officers as they go through to train those, and that's open to civil servants as well. It's internationally known, but also you've got the Army Leadership Development Program, which is for NCOs and senior non-commissioned officers and juniors as well. For those people, private soldiers who are looking at going to corporal, lance corporal, there's leadership development programs to enable them to develop the skills that they can lead in their teams when they move into a leadership role and task. There is so much information out there, and doctrine and books, etc. You've got the Centre of Army Leadership podcast, which I'd really recommend. It's brilliant. They get some really, truly inspirational people on. But the Centre for Army Leadership has been established. It has full-time academics who work there, and their sole purpose is to develop leadership within the army. And it's inputted from all officers and all ranks, input into this huge share of knowledge. They publish a fair bit of it online as well. You can access it. But yeah, it's a great repository of knowledge. There's doctrine out there already. There's been a new booklet, new guidance they've released about leadership within the British Army and how it works. But also there's the Army Leadership Code, which is a little booklet which talks about sort of the values and standards of the army, but also how the leadership styles. So you talk about sitting the army from an outside perspective, sits on this very autocratic command and control style. And I've talked about that quite a bit actually, but that's only one small snippet of it. If you imagine there's a big, sorry if I'm getting away from the microphone, I'm sort of putting my hands out now wide. You imagine there's sort of like a sliding scale. And one side you've got autocratic, and then on the other side you've got this sort of empowerment, sort of laissez-faire sitting back. Your style of leadership will have to move forwards and back along that line depending on the situation.
Absolutely.
So in barracks, there's no point doing command and control. However, when the enemy's getting rounds down at you, yeah, you want to tell them you are going up there because you need to get that done. Because if you don't, the rest of us are going to die.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we've talked about that before in this podcast. We called it the walking the line, and on one side you've got, as you say, command and control, where your building's on fire. You need to take action. We're not going to sit around and have a fluffy debate about it. We're just going to, I'm the leader. Yeah. This is where we're going out this way. You got to go. And the other end of that is a fallen off the bike, and how you would react. If it was like a child or your own child that had fallen off the bike. It's a more supportive kind of nature. And you're right. It slides between the two depending on the sort of situation.
Yeah, and there's so many different facets of it as well. It sits, sometimes you've got to do coaching. You've got to coach your team, and sometimes you've got to be a bit more directive in what you do. And that is how that works comes down to experience and trial and error and learning. When is it time to come down and say, no, you need to do this, and when is it time to say, actually, I want to open up and see what you guys say. What are your suggestions around the table? Because we've got time to make those decisions. We've got time to share. What do you think your design ideas? Oh, you don't want to hear mine. No, I do want to hear your idea, because your idea might be brilliant. It might not be, but the more you give out ideas, the more everyone will give out ideas. And that touches upon sort of empowerment, which is a huge aspect. If you want to learn about empowerment, Turn the Ship Around by John Marquis is just an incredible journey book and story. It's really, really powerful book. I would really recommend to your reading if you're looking at empowerment and how to empower a team that you're leading. Because it is fantastic. I don't want to ruin it, so do give it a read. It's a true story. And then there's also the Army is called adventurous training. And other sort of types of training, like sports as well, massively into sports. And what this does is this develops character massively. It helps, putting competitive in there, exposed risk to danger. That's adventurous training. That's stuff like going mountaineering, kayaking, abseiling, skydiving, skiing. This controlled, though it sounds all good, fun stuff. And don't get me wrong, if that's what you're into, which I am personally, it's brilliant. Yeah. But that controlled exposure to risk and danger has really helped me develop. So when I go and do my job, I understand risk, and I'm better at being under those pressures, those physical pressures and strains. And sports helps develop competitiveness, because you've got to be competitive. You want to win that firefight. You don't want the enemy to win. You want to win. Because if they win, you're probably going to go home in a body bag. So that's... So those elements that the Army does to invest in its people, to develop character, to develop the fundamental understandings of leadership, but also the opportunities to fail, the fail, learn, win mentality that the Army has. They talk about it on the adverts. And some people, I think, in the Army are sort of saying, "Oh wow, this is a new fad thing." It's not. I think the Army's been doing it. The Army's been doing it for years. As a young officer, I am set up to fail all the time. One, because the seniors, the old and bold, the senior guys who've been around, they think it's quite funny, and the soldiers think it's a bit funny when they see me get it wrong. But also, it's a really important part of my development to get things wrong in a safe environment. And you probably find it's a safe psychological environment if you're going to go so far, if you want to put some labels on it, where I feel okay to fail, so that I can learn and develop. Now, Einstein said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. As long as I feed back and I learn from that experience, then that's gonna help me develop. I mean, this is all fantastic stuff. Like, exactly. I mean, you're articulating it probably far better than I ever could, which is why I'm sort of letting you run with it. But that adventure sports
bit, I think, is quite important actually, because a lot of what I've been talking about recently is this building up of resilience and building up of this growth mindset, which is very much what you're talking about. And those sports, adventure sports things, they just, even if you're not into it, it gets you out of that comfort zone into a bit more of a risky environment. And what happens is you're around people and you're in an environment where you can test that comfort zone. You can go a bit outside. So you can fail a little bit if you need to. And what that does is it helps sort of build up. So I do this with my children. Like, I just get them to go outside their comfort zone, like 1 or 2%. And over time, it helps build up some resilience and gives them a bit of a growth mindset. And that's what we don't see in the construction industry. We don't do that.
Yeah. And I think something really important to say, and what you're talking about, putting people in their discomfort zone, is I went mountaineering, and I was with a group of people. Some people don't normally go mountaineering. I wasn't the leader of the expedition. We just went up Trefan, which is in Wales. Anyone been up there? It's a little bit of a scramble up there, but it's a lovely mountain. But the weather came in. The people we were walking with, they were relatively new to mountaineering, and they started to panic. What I did is I stepped in and I just calmed them down. I had a chat. I whipped out the Haribo. Always good to have a bag of Haribo whenever you're in a command. It helps. It raises morale, but it helped these people just to calm down. I had a word with them. I held their hands as we walked down some slippery stuff. But it developed them because they had this controlled exposure to risk. It also developed me because I learned how to deal with people who were scared. And I wasn't scared at all. I was perfectly happy. I was like, the weather came in, cool. We're just on a mountain. It's fine. You just walk down. But for them, it was a big thing. But there's so much learning. So when you're exposing your kids to more and more risk, you're learning at the same time, which is brilliant.
And Haribo works as well for that.
Haribo. And actually, I always have a bag of Haribo in my rucksack whenever I go on exercise. I don't always bring it out. But when the chips are down, when morale's low, normally when it's raining, everyone's hanging out, bring out a bag of Haribo goes a long way. Also, that works at work.
Yeah, I was just going to say,
everyone's sad. Getting the donuts or getting the pizzas or whatever it is can really pick up if you're on that project and people are down, or just making someone a cup of tea. And giving them a bicky.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. And I think if you take nothing else away from this podcast episode today, it's wherever you go, take a bunch of Haribo with you. I'd say one of the things I'm going to do with my son in April is we're going to go mountaineering in the lakes, in the Lake District.
Lovely.
He'd never been before, so it'll be about outside his comfort zone, but he's going to do it with his dad. He knows the lake quite well. And I'm definitely taking Haribo with me now. So
when you're at the top,
good tip.
When you're at the top, just whip it out. Just get the sugar up to get back down. And also when you've got to tidy up all your kit away, it just gets you through, having to sort your tent out, your boots out.
Awesome.
So talking about the, differences, construction, there's late investment. There's not no investment. There's late investment. There's early investment. If you're fortunate, I didn't get on a grad scheme, but if you're fortunate enough to get on a grad scheme, there is a little bit of that in there. They do chuck it in, and there's a little bit throughout. But the construction industry is also a high risk environment. It's
Absolutely.
Not life or death in the same way you're getting shot at. However, in the constructor side of things, it is life and death if you get it wrong. You're dealing
absolutely.
With big, heavy plant. You're dealing with soil that could collapse and fall on you. So there's a lot in there to consider.
And
we do mitigate that risk in massive ways.
I was going to say, just to focus the mind as well. The last time I looked at the HSC website, construction was the biggest industry with the highest number of fatalities for 2020. And I think it took up over almost 2/3 of the pie chart, something like that. It's like not just the biggest amount of fatalities; it's like it's disproportionate. So it is a high risk environment, 100%. Sorry, go on.
I'm going to say, and we have a lot of mitigation in there. So does the army, but the army is all about controlled risk.
Mm-hmm.
The construction industry is about eliminating risk, and there's a bit different there. But late investment in people beyond traditional education and legally required training is a big one. So when I talk about legally required training, I'm talking about getting those qualifications that are required for you to do your job under CDM regulations and health and safety executive legislations and laws. So making sure you have your SMSTS, making sure you've got your first aid, your fire warden, using your Cat and Jenny, for guys working on site, them operating the equipment to make sure they've got the CITB approved plant operators, etc., scaffolds, make sure scaffold people are trained to put that up. Beyond that, there's no investment in the people. Also graduates. So if you want to become a graduate and go towards your chartered, yeah, they pay for that, and they sometimes throw you a bone, but you've got to do a lot of the work for it. The only time I know of investment in organisation is senior leadership. When you get those senior managers, when they finally have worked out something about leadership, or they've gone on a journey like yourself, or they've got through by just bluster and aggression. We all sort of know people like that, but you also have people who are just naturally talented for leadership. There's no investment in it. There's no coaching, other than coaching from maybe one leader to another. But how do you know your mentor, who's teaching you how to lead, is any good?
Quite. Yeah, and I don't want to judge or anything like that, because certainly, as I say, my journey, there was like zilch in the leadership side of it. And so what I find a lot of the time is everybody's just learning off their own leaders or their past leaders, and how did they do it? Okay, well, that one shouted, so okay, well, that's how you must do it. I'll shout as well. And
it's funny you say that. I was on exercise, and one of the NCOs I was in a command appointment, and I was getting shouted and screamed at when I was in a certain command appointment by an NCO. So when I got into a more senior command appointment, that's what I did, and I got in trouble. Yeah. But that was learnt behaviour.
Yeah,
it's very dangerous.
Absolutely. And so it is all about you sort of just learn off the last person. And again, not to come back to what it's like being a parent, but that's how children learn. They learn off you. They watch what you do. If I was to go around shouting all the time, that's what my children will do. So, why do we expect different results in the construction industry?
As a graduate, it is absolutely terrifying. It is, you're so influenced by the immediate people around you. The first team you work with can have a huge impact on the rest of your career for many years to come, as a minimum. So those habits that have been taught in that, unless you identify that as poor leadership, can mold you into becoming that sort of, they talk about being old school, and shouting and stuff like that. That's just bad habits. But people who do that, they don't know better, because that's how they learn to lead.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now, I was going to talk about something called mission command. But before we go on to that, I think it'd be really interesting to look at what military leadership is based on. And the way it is described is values-based leadership. So everything that army leaders do is based upon the values and standards of the British Army. So the British officer, what they do, there's the framework. It's sort of about what the leaders are, and talks about championing the values and standards and being an example of responsible influence. Because as a leader, you have a huge influence, and we talked about that, about graduates starting in the workplace, and children as well, learning from learned behaviours. So we, as an army officer, I need to embody the values and standards and champion them, and lead by example to all those subordinates underneath me, to ensure that we can do the job right. And that's how leadership works in the British Army. It might not be the right way all the time, but it's definitely a proven way to work. Then looking at the Army leadership framework, you've got what leaders know, which is sort of the people and profession. And knowing your people, I think we talked about before, is the most important thing. You were talking, I was listening to one of your latest episodes, and you were talking about getting to know your team, sitting down, have a bicky with them, spending 5 minutes with them a day. So on my latest exercise, I got contacted about 2:00 in the morning. I can send you a video if you'd like on WhatsApp. I got contacted at 2:00 in the morning. I was fast asleep. We were in our harbour area, admin area, and it's called getting bumped. And the enemy started firing at us, and it was just chaos. It was almost chaos, because everyone was like, "What's going on?" Trying to find out the enemy location, half asleep. My radio operator had disappeared, so I couldn't even send reports up to my higher command to request QRF, which is a quick reaction force of reinforcements. And then the colonel rocks up, who's my boss's boss, rocks up, and he goes, "Oh, Mr. Pickett, can you tell me your section commander's names?" And I couldn't. And he said, "Why do you not know your people?" You need to know your people. Your people are the biggest asset. And that was a big mistake, not mistake. That was a huge learning point. There's something that, ingrained with me, just feeling like I really don't know my people. And I worked really hard off that to learn their names, because these weren't my regular troops. A few of them were. I knew everyone from my unit, but I didn't know the other units, sort of guys who had come in. So yeah, knowing your people is huge. And the profession, that's something you get learned, and that's sort of on the job training, etc. Being a troop commander, being a site engineer, but knowing your people, getting to know your people on site, that's huge. I spend a lot of time investing in relationships, and I don't see it as wasted time, because there's times I sometimes I'll withdraw from that account and say I need something done, but I always put into the account because I ask them how they are, how they've got a young family, and make them feel wanted, and make them feel like someone really does care for them.
Yeah, it's picking up on that key word you say, which you said, which was investment.
Yeah,
there's time investment and there's time spent. Watching Netflix is time spent. Really getting to know the people that you work with is time invested.
Yeah. And then you've got Army Leadership Framework, which talk about what leaders do. And it's based upon Adair's balls, which is sort of the time, team, task. Which is sort of the whole Army leadership is based upon that. Have you come across Adair's balls?
Well, we've touched on time, team, task. On one of our earlier episodes with the CEO of my organisation, John Chubb, and how we used that process to help manage through the pandemic. What was poured in at the time? Was it the task? Was it the team? Was it the individual?
That was a truly great podcast, actually. I really, really enjoyed that one. And it's true, so John Adair's developed that in the 1980s, 1970s, and it's been adopted by the British Army. But as he says, it's like a set of juggling balls. Mm-hmm. You've got to work out which one's going to be at the top at what time, but don't focus on having one at the top for too long, because you'll drop the others. So it is that balance of adjusting that. And then how do leaders do it? They do it through behaviors and styles. And we talked a bit about the styles, and then sort of behaviors is leading by example. Mm-hmm. Why would I go do something that I know that you wouldn't do? In the British Army, there's a lot about, especially in the sort of through the training cycle, there's a lot of, all the officers, they get absolutely beasted at Sandhurst, more so than during the soldier training. But all the officers are aware, all the soldiers are aware that actually the officers get a really hard time on their training courses, because then they come back in, they can go, well, yeah, you should go do that bayonet drill. You need to go run that. You need to go run up there, because I've done this before. They know that you've done it. They know that you have that capability. Yeah. If you sat in your armchair and you said to someone, oh, go make me a cup of tea, when you've never made a cup of tea for anyone else. Yeah. So that's sort of the behaviors, and that's the Army Leadership Framework in a sort of a nutshell, and that's how it works. I think something really interesting, talking about differences that we look at, I talked about this sort of values-based leadership, is look at the values and standards of the British Army. One of the big sort of values of the British Army is called sea drills. Is the way of remembering it, and it's courage, discipline, respect for others, integrity, loyalty, and selfless commitment. And they are the principal values of how the Army operates. And by adhering to those in all you do, and there's this thing called the Army Service Test, which is the question you ask yourself if you do anything is, I'm not going to say it verbatim, but the gist of it is, are my actions going to bring the Army into disrepute? And will they fail this test? Will they bring the Army into disrepute? And if the answer is yes, then you shouldn't be doing them. Mm. And that's like, you talk to a lot of leaders, and they probably have their own values, but they're very clear values. And I think that's a really important thing as a leader. Yeah. You can maybe take the British Army ones, and I personally take those because I've been sort of spent a lot of time with the British Army, and I truly believe in all those values. Yeah. But if you don't have those values, then you're just not going to be in a straight direction. You're not going to head in a straight line. Yeah. It's
value-based decisions, isn't it?
It's values-based leadership. So if I make my test thinking, well, if what I do, is it going to bring my team and me into disrepute? No, no, it won't. Then I'll carry on. Yes, it's a bit dodgy. It doesn't make me feel comfortable. And actually, that really sits in with the ICE codes of,
it does,
of conduct, which is a huge one in there. So, is what I'm doing ethical ultimately? And if the answer is no, then maybe you need to walk away from that business. You need to walk away from that business agreement, or maybe you need to walk away from that company.
I was going to say, and you can make your own values. You can, not just for your individual. And a lot of people can sit back and say, "Oh, my organisation doesn't have any values," but you can be that person within your team to champion that, I think. So one thing that I like to do with the people I work is, okay, well, why do we come to work? Why do we work for this team? And what is our team about? What are our values? And once you get that established and you do that together, then you run, as you say, your decisions through that value check to decide if what we're going to do, taking on this client, trying to meet this deadline, is that going to compromise what we're about? Then, well, we shouldn't be doing it then.
Yeah. And so I've got a question for you.
Okay. What
are your business's values? not your team's, your business. Because I don't know mine.
No, I mean,
I'll admit that now. I'll put my hand up. By example, I don't know mine.
This is where I should do it inside out. But to be honest, RPS are really good with that. They do have a very clear message about what our values are. Stronger together is the one that I remember a lot. Stronger together, that's working together. Easy to connect. So that's, being able to, easy to connect. It's not just about, I can get you on Teams or on the phone or the email anytime. It's about having relationships that you can openly talk to one another. So stronger together, easy to connect. And I'm sure there's either 2 more or 3 more. I think there's 2 more.
Yeah.
But you know what? But I'll save those. I'm not going to take those.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. You've got to leave some more for next time. Yeah. But a lot of construction companies, I don't think their leadership is value-based. And I think your business is particularly enlightened. And the work your boss does speaking to him, you can hear that he's passionate about it, and he's passionate about his people, and he's also passionate about the business moving forwards and working and operating 50 years down the line when he's gone, so that's really impressive. But not all construction companies do. So I'd say that's a massive difference in between the military construction is values-based leadership. The leadership is there. It's functional leadership to make sure we can turn a quick buck.
But also, just to add to that as well, it's the values, say, just my own organisation, very good. I like to adhere to them as well. But I also have my own values. And I do think a leader's role is to understand the values of the individuals within their team to mould sort of team's values. Because you, as someone that's being led or someone that's working as an employee, you have to work. You want to work for a purpose. You want to work for the values, but you want to know that your values are heard as well. Which is where I was going with, getting to know the people that you work with is getting to understand what their values are. So if you can mold your teams or organization values, not just about what you want to do as a CEO, but what your team wants to be able to achieve. What do they want to see change in the world? So absolutely.
And I think that is a big difference there, where the army does dictate them. There is that dictation. This is the values of the army, and if you don't like that, that's fine. The door's over there. I think there's somewhere in between sort of accepting values and working with the team to see actually how people's principles with them. Because I think a lot of these values, you can find within religion and other sort of similar organizations where they are, the 10 Commandments. They're just being a good person.
Absolutely.
So, that sort of sums up that little aspect of it. But talking about sort of leadership and where you sit with your values, Jonathan Perks has his book called Inspiring Leadership, which is the first leadership book I ever read. And he's a personal mentor of mine as well. But he has a thing called the Leadership Compass. I think it'd be quite interesting just to reflect, and you don't need to maybe respond to this, but I definitely, this is a tool I use to reflect on my ability as a leader. And there's 8 points to the compass. And starting at the north, you have moral quadrant, you have your purpose quadrant, you have your health quadrant, you have your intellectual quadrant, you have your emotional quadrant, your resilience quadrant, then you have your brand quadrant, and then your legacy quadrant. And all these 8 points sort of make up a compass face. By doing and understanding all of those points within yourself as an individual leader, which I do, and I assess these personally, that is how I make sure that I can sort of make sure my compass is point to the true north of what I want to achieve and how I can inspire my team as the leader.
That's brilliant. Yeah.
It's a great tool, and there's lots of tools out there. But I think that really sort of sums up sort of the different styles, I think, between military leadership and construction leadership. However, there's a little tool, and I think there's an acronym called LEADERS, and it's in the Army Leadership sort of pamphlet I talked about, the Army Leadership Code, and it's called LEADERS. And the first one, and I think it's the most important one, is called Lead by Example. Leaders should lead by example. If you want your team to be, their first thing on site in the morning, as a leader, you can't be rocking up at 10. So and there's more onto it, and I'd encourage anyone to sort of go read and have a flick through, because there's plenty of good knowledge in there. And a lot of these leadership sort of case studies have been paid for, like in health and safety, have been paid for in blood. All the things we do, all the things we do on site, there's a reason we do these safety things, and ultimately it's because someone died because it went wrong. Absolutely.
I think there's a lot in there that has opened my eyes in terms of how the military invest in leadership, and quite clearly how there's a disproportionate lack of investment in leadership within the construction industry. And as through this podcast and through the things that I'm trying to do with the help of yourself and everybody on the podcast is trying to change that, and trying to, as you say at the start, enlighten people about leadership and try and grow their own understanding.
And I mean the ICE, personally, I feel have a long way to go. Attribute 3, leadership and management. It talks about plan for effective project implementation. Okay, fair play. But then B, C, and D all have manage. There's no mention of leadership in there whatsoever.
No. And
hopefully, hopefully that you and others, including myself, will hopefully be able to change that one day.
Absolutely.
And really reflect on leadership and not managing a process.
I think that you're absolutely right. And if you if you look in the ICE virtual library, there's not a single book on the leadership or the kind of leadership that we're talking about now. No. And the webinars, there's one leadership video in all the webinars, and I know that because it's the one that I did with the ICE East Midlands. So it's purely about the exact leadership that we're talking about now, and so we do need to talk about it more. ICE is quite a big institution within the construction industry, and you talk about leading by example. Certainly, that's one that we should do. And at the moment, we're doing a fantastic job talking about sustainability and net zero carbon. But there are other areas that we need to make great strides in. So we're coming towards the end of this podcast, and which is a great shame, because I say we just continue to talk for hours and hours and hours on this subject. Yes. And first of all, before I do ask the last question, I just want to thank you so much for all the wisdom and information that you provided, because it's absolutely brilliant information, and it completely resonates with exactly what this is all about. So thank you ever so much for sharing all that and giving me your time. The last question I want to ask you is, what do you think is the most important aspect of leadership?
I'd say authenticity, being authentic in everything you do, be that when you're putting people to work and you're influencing people to do something that maybe they don't want to do. If you're authentic in the way that you communicate that, and the fact that what you're doing, touching upon what we talked about, values and standards, that what you're asking to do adheres to your values and standards, that people will buy into that and they will believe you. They may not like that, but they will know that deep down they'll see it in your eyes. So, it's like animals. They can sense fear. A dog can sense fear in you, and they can also sense sadness. So when you are authentic in yourself and truly understand yourself, then you can give out orders, you can put people to work in an authentic manner, which will inspire those around you. Leaders do lead by example, and leadership never has a day off. You can't just rock up and be a leader. You got to be a leader all the time. So to be an authentic leader, you need to be authentic to yourself all the time, and that's a huge journey of self-discovery. It might sound a little bit up in the air, but it is, a big part of leadership is understanding where you draw the sand, where does it lie with you, and what will you stand for and what won't you stand for. And I think the best way I think of it is those moments when I walk away or don't say something and I feel really bad. That's the point I reflect and go, well, why don't I agree with that? Why do I feel really sad that I didn't say anything? Why do I feel frustrated I didn't say anything? I was disappointed in myself because I'm my biggest critic. So when I do that, then I can go, actually, that is where my values are. That's where my standards are. That is where I'm going to walk away from this business. Or that is actually, I'm going to say something, because if I don't say something, I'm not being authentic and true to myself. And I'll walk away from this, and maybe I'll have to carry out and do something that I don't believe in. And you can see it in someone's eyes when they don't believe in something and they don't think it's true.
Absolutely, could not agree more. I think authenticity is absolutely essential part of being a leader. So Nathanael, thank you ever so much for this time and being a guest on the show. I think there's a tremendous amount of value that you've been able to provide today. So thank you ever so much. And all I can do is offer to sort of be part of your podcast, the ICE South Branch podcast as well, so I can hopefully do the same for your listeners.
Michael, it would be an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast. And I'd just like, can I leave you just one quote before I go?
Yeah.
This is probably, anyone who's looked at any military leadership or been to Sandhurst probably heard this, but it's Field Marshal Montgomery. And he says, leadership is the capacity and will to rally men and women to a common cause. Sorry, let's start again. Leadership is the capacity and will to rally men and women to a common purpose and to the character which inspires confidence. That's Field Marshal Montgomery, and that's something that really resonates with me, and I think that ties in really, really well with being authentic.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Nathanael. And thank you ever so much.